Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm Nathan Fink.
I'm Jasmine Torres Allen, and this is New Hampshire Family Now,
a show about building family in the Granite State. Today in the show, Jasmine and I talk Kinship Care Month, as well as celebrating Hispanic heritage in all its expressions. And later, we are joined by two kinship navigators to discuss New Hampshire's network of resources. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org.
I guess first and foremost, though, I have to apologize because my voice, I took some PTO and I immediately got sick.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It's like an old car. Like I keep thinking, like, is it time to trade in my body? But it's so good to see you, Jasmine. How was Michigan?
It was awesome. I learned so much in my, Jasmine learned something fashion, but so much fun. I was there during Art Prize, which was really cool. I got to see lots of amazing installations and artists putting their work together on the street. And it was really cool to just, when you see someone's passion come alive on the street, it's just a different feeling.
It was a conference?
Yes, it was for the NEDA conference, which is essentially when all of our PBS stations kind of get together and we discuss what's working, what's not working, what can we do better. And I learned some things from other people who are in my same position. And, and we we vent a little, but we also learn from each other.
Yeah.
So.
What did you bring back with you?
So I went out onto Lake Michigan, and
which is by the way, right?
That was my first time on a Great Lake. So I was amazed at what it looked like. It felt like I was at the ocean. And so I learned from the Water Institute there that works with the Grand Valley State University. And we did some water testing out in the water. And I got to learn how they do research and how we should not be consuming fish at the rate that we consume fish, which was a little scary because I think about all of our water resources. And so it kind of awoke the environmentalist in me a little bit that I think has been asleep.
Yeah. So different question, but how did your kids handle your absence?
Ooh, that was fun because I was obviously worried that my partner was going to have to be with two kids by himself all the time for at least a week. So, we did the basic, all right, how do I prepare you so that you can, handle the week with the kids by yourself? And thankfully, I have my in-laws for support and, they helped with school pickups so that my husband could work. But dinner time, he really struggled because I'm the cook. I love to cook, and my kids are very used to having a home cooked meal when when I get home from work. So when I came back, they were like, "Are you going to cook dinner?" Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to cook dinner." Yeah, it was literally the first question. Are you going to make food? Are you going to make dinner? And I was like, "Yep, I'm going to make dinner." And I made a really nice home cooked meal, and dead silence
because people were eating.
Yes, absolutely. They were just devouring their plates because they were just so hungry. And I was like, did you feed them during the week? He's like, yeah, they had dinner.
Yeah.
But it was, basic stuff that he could put together. And I'm not going to lie, it was a nice feeling.
I guess one of the reasons I asked, though, is, I'm wildly fascinated by the way kids interpret your absence and their emotional response to it. Because my oldest son seems to, when my wife leaves and comes back from a work trip or something like that, he's so excited to see her. But the moment she walks in, he's really distant. The expression of his emotionality is like that. Did you notice anything?
With my daughter, she's super close to me. So she immediately gravitated towards me. She could not wait. It's funny with my son because we're still in that process of, we're getting used to each other, being together, he, according to his Gigi, he was so excited. And like when he was talking, about, oh, mommy's coming home. I can't wait. And when he saw me, he was like, like she's here.
Oh, you again.
Yeah, you again. Exactly. But then like afterwards, when he realized I'm not going away again, he was like, okay, all right, we're good.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, you're a kinship caregiver. Obviously, September is Kinship Care Month. And I would love to know over the course of your kinship care with your son and all the pressures that you might feel, what are some of the awarenesses of different emotions, your way, his way? How has that changed? What have you noticed?
It's tricky because, my son, he comes from a very traumatic background. And so there are a lot of things that I had to slow down on and not have such expectations, because I feel like we put a lot of expectations on kids according to their age. And if you've worked with kids before, where kids might fall in terms of milestones and where they need to be at, maybe academically or emotionally. But when you have a child in your life who has had a traumatic background, I say this with some parents is that sometimes they are stuck at that age in which they experience trauma. And so, my son, he deals with harder things in life with the way he might have dealt with it when he was maybe 2. And so I'm not going to lie, that was really tricky for me because in my brain, I was like, he should be here when, in reality, all that trauma is going to set him back. And so there are a lot of moments where I had to pause and be a little bit more patient and understand that he's not going to meet my expectations. I can't set expectations on a child like that. And so you can have expectations, but doesn't mean that they're going to have the tools to be able to reach those. But I did have a win this week. I had one win, which was at school. The teacher had let me know that when someone was upset with him, he did come over and apologize, which was out of his norm because he still struggles with the apology. But he also said they need space right now. And I was like, whoa.
Recognizing what somebody else.
Yes. Yeah. And I know that we do it at home in terms of like when he's really upset or he's having really big emotions, I usually ask, do you need space? It's one of those things where I've gotten used to like asking my daughter if she needs space. And so now he's in that process. And so we talk about how sometimes we have big emotions, we need space.
I like that as a question better because the idea of you need space right now.
Yeah, it makes it so much more aggravating because they're like, no, I don't.
Yeah. So I want to kind of zoom in then on your emotions that are tied to your expectations because, like having expectations isn't like an emotional framework.
No.
It's something that precedes it, right? Mm-hmm. But when you see those expectations either not being met or being shifted, what are some of the emotions that you're going through?
Oh my goodness. I remember like at the beginning when I had these super high expectations about being a kinship giver, I took it like very personally when he wasn't meeting those expectations or he was doing things that I was like, whoa, what is this? Like, what do I do? And it was those emotions of like, am I being a good parent? And like, I was feeling a little guilty. I was like, am I doing the right thing here? Being a kinship giver, because I feel like we all think it, but we don't say it out loud that sometimes we're like, wait, did we do the right thing?
Right.
Like, and I think that's a really normal human reaction to like really stressful situations where you're like, I don't even know how to deal with this.
Right. And you're not alone. I mean, there's estimates are 20,000 plus families in New Hampshire, right? Mm-hmm. Having, I would imagine, some level of emotionality and at times doubt.
Yeah.
How did you handle those emotions?
You know what I always say, Nathan, is talking it out, right?
Yes.
I always say that.
You're like the mayor of Funky Town.
Yeah. I guess I'm in a position of like, I'm not afraid to talk about it. And I think that the more I talk about it with people, the more comfortable they feel sharing their emotions with me or like, trying to understand where I might be coming from. They ask more questions and it opens a door because sometimes for some people, like kinship caregiving can seem like such a unique situation for people. Right. And so what we need to realize is there are a lot more families who are providing kinship care and it needs to be more more normalized. Like, hey, we also experience lots of parenting decisions and emotions that come with, parenting someone that, might be family, but isn't family, and all the guilt and the emotions that come with that.
Right. It's funny that you say that, because I keep thinking there's a couple of levels of thoughts that I've had. I think, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, but kinship care, when we say it this way, it's a cultural phenomenon. We're putting it in a different basket, but multi-generational families.
Yeah.
This is part of family. It's
Exactly.
multi-generational family.
So it's so funny because in Puerto Rico, for me, my aunts all live within less than a mile of each other.
Right.
So, all of my cousins, all of us, we all grew up so close. We all have a community of, people that we leaned on.
Right.
And it's like you said, multi-generational. Our grandparents are right there. Our aunts and uncles, it doesn't matter, great aunts and uncles, they all live within super close of each other or within the same household. And even here in New England, my parents, my family, they all live in the same house. It's just different floors. You know what I mean? But it's that I grew up in that multi-generational household. So for me, this is super normal.
Yeah. Now, I also, September into October is Hispanic Heritage Month.
That's right.
And I'm super excited. You had been, in the past, you had told me that you've got some ways to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month.
Yes.
In a way that actually does, in fact, celebrate it.
And a couple of things what I usually tell people is think about other cultures. Latinos are not a monolith. We're not just Mexican. We're not just Puerto Rican. There's so many different cultures within the culture. Yeah. And so, going out of your comfort zone to learn about a different country, maybe you want to learn about Paraguay, maybe you want to learn about Uruguay, you know what I mean? Like all those countries that people tend to forget about, but they are there and they exist and they have their own cultures and sometimes their own dialects. So getting to know other cultures within the culture is like a great way to celebrate. And also, obviously, New Hampshire PBS, we always have a ton of great stuff to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. Lots of great activities for kids. We have Alma's Way and we have Super Y. We have all these really great shows that touch on Hispanic Heritage Month in lots of different and fun ways so that you and your kids can learn together.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to see you.
Yes.
So glad you didn't go down in a ship in Lake Michigan.
Me too.
And when we come back, I interview 2 kinship navigators from across the state. Don't go anywhere. Today's episode was brought to you by Upreach Therapeutic Equestrian Center. Located in Goffstown, New Hampshire, Upreach partners with the Power of Horse to create strong children, strong families, and strong communities. To learn more about Upreach Therapeutic Equestrian Center and its many inspirational programs, visit upreachtec.org. That's upreachtec.org.
Today's show was also brought to you by Burgoo Media, a full-service media company dedicated to helping nonprofits realize impact stories for print, video, social, and legacy media, and more. Both budget-conscious and grant-friendly, Burgoo Media helps your organization celebrate the humans in human services. Learn more at burgoomedia.com.
And a quick reminder that on October 13th, riders will once again be cycling 100 miles for the 3rd annual Ride for Resilience. This year's route features New Hampshire's Lakes region, connecting family resource centers as we go. So please turn out in support of our riders by visiting nhchildrenstrust.org/2023-ride-4-resilience, because building strong Granite State families takes each and every one of us. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. For the second half of the show, I'm thrilled to welcome Rosemary Nugent, both a kinship caregiver and, for a few years now, a kinship navigator with the Grapevine Family and Community Resource Center in Antrim, New Hampshire. Rosemary, it's so good to see you again.
Thank you. It's good to see you again too, Nathan.
So I wanted to start with your experience as a kinship caregiver. How did you come to know that taking in a grandchild was something that wasn't unique to your own household, but that it was in fact larger, more of a community or statewide phenomenon?
Well, when our grandson started kindergarten, we brought him down to the bus stop. It was a crowded bus stop and a lot of kids, K through 4. And after a while, I realized that there were 11 children at the bus stop. Out of the 11, 9 of them were being raised by grandparents just at that one bus stop. And then we knew this is epidemic.
It's amazing that you say that, because I'm like, oh my goodness. Now that I think of it, every time I pick my son up from something, I'm always aware of who's picking them up. And it does feel very much 25% of the time, 30% of the time, it's a grandparent.
If you aren't involved, you don't realize how many there are.
Yeah.
How many grandparents are or other kin.
Now that is a neighborhood realization. This is a bus stop. After you realize that you weren't alone in this and this was common, what then? What happened next?
Well, I think the counselor at our school realized that there were so many children being raised by grandparents that she got in touch with the Grapevine, with Carol Lunan and the River Center in Peterborough, because we worked together with Wendy Hill, and we formed a support group for the grandparents. And monthly meetings, the first one, everybody just sat there and cried and yelled and just let it all out. So it was really good for us and an eye opener for each other, I think.
Right, to express your circumstance. So do you remember from that, what some of the themes that kept coming up in that group?
Sure. Stigma. We were all embarrassed, ashamed, thought we were failures, didn't sign up for this, didn't know what we were going to do. Where were we going to get help? We had no idea what was out there. Nothing.
Yeah. And, you're still, have your grandson in the house.
He's in high school. He just started at Conval. He's doing well. He doesn't say much. He grunts a lot. He's 14, so I guess that's expected. But he's doing well. He's really doing well.
Right.
He doesn't see anything wrong with living with Mimi and Pop Pop.
That is great. Now, for some time, though, you have also then assumed the role of a kinship navigator, which is a staff specifically trained to help kinship caregivers like yourself find and access resources throughout New Hampshire. How has your experience as a kinship caregiver informed your work as a navigator?
Well, I think because I've gone through it and I listen to the other grandparents, nothing surprises me anymore. I've heard it all. And I can relate to what they're saying because most of it is drug involvement. A lot of it is that and incarceration. But I think it's helped me because I understand and I can form a good friendship or a relationship with these grandparents. They trust me, because they know I've been through it. And I just think that the trust is the big thing.
What is one piece of advice that you're finding that you give consistently to people in this situation?
Well, every week I do weekly check-ins with them all. First thing I say is, how are you? What can I do for you? A lot of the things they need are just emotional support. A lot of resources we give out. We help children with camp, Medicaid, getting TANF. That's a big one. A lot of the grandparents come in not even knowing that they're eligible for TANF, which is a shame because that money is there for us. So I go over there and I help them fill out the form and get it started for them. But I guess there's really no universal, you can't put anything on all of them together. They're all unique.
I keep thinking about the culture of the stigma. You said the first thing that you heard was the stigma. There's some shame involved with this. Now that the kinship navigators are out there and have been for years, and there's a growing awareness, are you feeling that culture or people more willing to talk about their experience?
I think so. It took me a while. My husband and I were asked to do a story with the Concord Monitor. So we went down for the interview and everything. And I said to her, this was early on, before Kinship Navigators were around. And I said, I really don't want our name mentioned. And she said, well, we can't do it without your names because we were afraid of some retaliation from our son. But we did it and nothing happened as far as he's concerned. And I think that kind of opened the floodgates for me. I started advocating with my name, getting out there, letting people know. So the stigma kind of disappeared. For many of the new grandparents, that stigma takes a while to go.
Yeah.
But when they realize there's so many of us, I think that helps a lot.
Right. Now, if there were somebody out there today who is hearing this podcast, what would you want to tell them about their experience that might help them approach a kinship navigator?
Well, it's funny you asked because last night on Facebook, there's a lot of grandparents groups and somebody was asking, she said, should I get a kinship navigator? Because I'm going to need money for camp. And so I reached out right away, found out where she lived, told her where kinship navigators were. And how resourceful they can be in getting the help that she may need. So hopefully she did reach out.
Well, Rosemary, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for all the incredible work you're doing.
Thank you. I love it. I love it.
Now, I want to bring in Ellen Michniewicz, a home visitor and kinship navigator with Families First Health and Support Center. Ellen, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, first and foremost, I would love to dive into the specific work of kinship navigators and linking caregivers to resources, because when you bring somebody into your home as a family member, there must be an immediate financial cost of supporting that family member. So what resources might be available for caregivers who find themselves in this position?
So depending upon the age of the child, obviously if the child is under the age of 5, we can connect them with WIC services and we help navigate that paperwork. Sometimes we find that what really happens with these families, like you said, there is often a financial component that needs to be met for whatever reason. So one of the things that we do to help folks is we see, what kind of financial resources can they apply for and how do they navigate that? So we often will go to the website for disability. Can we apply for that? Does the child have a need that needs to be met there? Do they need to apply for food stamps? All of these different services. And then often we find that parents or grandparents or caregivers, they often just need help navigating that paperwork. Now, if we think about folks who are often, I have caregivers who are in their 60s, 70s, and they don't have as much experience with the internet and working the computer and finding these things online. So that is one thing that we often help them do as we go on. We help them get a New Hampshire Easy account, fill out all the paperwork, find out where it is, and that sort of thing. And there's also the component of, do they qualify for parent support, for child support? And how do we navigate that?
I mean, when I hear this, I think, oh my goodness, because there's a lot of different layers that do need to be navigated. One of which resources may have changed. Certainly over the course of the last couple of years and decades, the way we apply for these resources has changed. But then I also think of the idea when you welcome someone into your home that you weren't necessarily planning for. There's probably a fair amount of stigma, but then there's your own well of resources. You didn't necessarily plan to have those resources allocated that way.
And a need to kind of, as one grandparent said to me, she said, I am great at budgeting, but now I have to rebudget. And it's often just sitting with someone and looking at their plan and saying, okay, now what do you need to? We're kind of hand holders in that respect.
I love the fact that you actually are meeting each family where they're at, though, saying, all right, here's the spread of resources. Here is your family and your family's potential needs. Now, what can we look at to meet those needs? But I also imagine that depending on the type of arrangement we're talking about, kinship arrangement, whether or not it's informal, legal guardianship, foster care placement, or even adoption. So can we explore some of those different types of kinship arrangements?
Of course. So the first one that we have is an informal arrangement, and that's often between the parent or the biological caregiver and the non-biological caregiver. So, they kind of have this meaning where I can't take care of my child or I need some extra help, and they do that. Sometimes DCYF is involved, and they say, we have to come up with another arrangement because you cannot take care of this child or these children. And that's where the biological caregiver will say, or could say, I don't want to go through the DCYF process. I'm just willing to give my child or children to this other caregiver and make that arrangement. And there's often a hope that there will be reunification with that one. And sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. And sometimes it moves forward to adoption or a formal arrangement or a legal arrangement. Then we have a formal arrangement, and that is such an ex parte was filed by somebody where someone went to the court and said, we need to have an emergency custody over this child or these children. They need to be taken from their situation. And the court hears that and they say, okay, there's that finding. And the children are then placed with the non-biological caregiver. And then there's 30 to 60 days, there's another hearing, and the court will review that. and then it moves forward from there. And then there's also where DCYF is involved, and they take the children, and before they place children in foster care, they will contact as many biological relatives as they can, and they get placed with a biological caregiver at that point.
Those arrangements must affect what resources you qualify for, no?
Absolutely, they do. So we have, as you said, we have an informal placement where maybe there's been an agreement between the caregiver and the parent. Maybe it's a biological connection, maybe it is not. At this time, if there's not a biological connection, there are no services, no extra financial services. I mean, if you are a grandparent or perhaps another biological relative, there can be financial help for that. And often the caregivers need to know where they fall, where they stand in that part of things. So there is that component to that.
I would imagine that the legal process itself is quite expensive as well. Are there resources available to assist, say, a grandparent, aunt, or uncle in order to essentially go for those filings?
So there is, to an extent. There's 211 legal, there's legal aid, and there's that sort of thing. We run something called POSTA groups, which is parenting second time around. And within that, there is an entire class that is based on the legal aspect of things and helping caregivers to access that legal.
Yeah.
And certainly they do not need to take a POSTA class in order to have access to that. But it is just one of the many things that we offer.
Now, I touched on this with Rosemary over at the Grapevine in Antrim, emotional support, because, that kinship caregivers may be feeling a whole host of emotions from shame to fear to anger. That's a lot. In your role as a kinship navigator, how do you go about helping someone unravel that enough in order to walk forward toward these resources?
That's probably the most important aspect and the most helpful aspect of the work that I do. And that's just speaking from my experience, is being there for that caregiver. And I've had more than one and more than several caregivers say, when I ask the question of how can I help you, often just listen. I just need someone to listen. Because all day long, all week long, all month long, these folks are there to meet somebody else's needs. And they are working overtime because they are playing catch up with this child or this family. And what they don't have is someone to listen to them, someone for them to just say, I just need to sit down with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, whatever, and someone to just listen. And through that act, they start to just tell you their story. And oftentimes that story leads into another story and into another. And pretty soon we're just having a conversation about life. And it's not like they're going to therapy where they have to choose their words and think about what they're talking about. It's just a conversation between two people who are benefiting from one another. That's a huge part of that emotional support that people need.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing as a kinship navigator and home visitor.
Thank you very much.
And to find a kinship navigator near you, visit fsnh.org. That's F as in Frank, S as in Sam, nh.org.
Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. Today's show was also brought to you by Merrimack County Savings Bank, who proudly supports the mission and efforts of New Hampshire Children's Trust. Founded in 1867, Merrimack has served people, businesses, nonprofits, and municipalities in central and southern New Hampshire for over 155 years by treating everyone with care, respect, and compassion. Visit your local offices in Bow, Concord, Kentucky, Hooksett, and Nashua, or go to www.themerrimack.com.
New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.